my camera down. Here we are. Welcome, welcome, everybody. Wonderful to see you. Yes, and here we are at the end of our term, thinking about Uranus and Gemini. Oh my goodness. So I promised to do the buttons. I will do them imperfectly as usual. This is the chart for now. And yeah, here we are with a nice Sun semi-square Uranus applying. Venus in her separating conjunction. Mercury on our midheaven for today, and Pluto obviously nudging towards the IC, although really in retrograde, it's kind of moving away. But that Aquarian IC co-ruled by Uranus. And we've got the moon squaring the MC-IC axis, squaring Mercury. Yeah, sun-moon trine, just perfected. As usual, don't have anything earth-shattering or otherwise to say about it, although we're returning to that moon in a later slide. So if anybody's got any that they want to comment or bring in, you know, surely a seminar on Uranus and Gemini should allow for interruptions, right?
Absolutely. The more the merrier.
Carole, did you want to remark on anything in the chart? No?
It's just, I don't know, astrology, you just can't make it up. I mean, yesterday, Friday the 4th, there's the big beautiful bill. The Venus in your Uranus, Venus crossing Uranus, and the, you know, rechristened, of course, the billionaire's beautiful bill,
Right.
by me. Yeah, there's the big beautiful bill. You know, it's a gift, really, isn't it? In terms of the symbolism.
Yes.
And we'll obviously be talking a bit about all of that. I mean, here we are in the middle of it all.
Hard to avoid.
And the Neptune station as well. Yeah, going retro. Yeah, not sure exactly how to weave that in, but
Alligator Alcatraz, and that sort of somehow that is the Saturn Neptune operating. Anyway, shudder. Yes, we know where we are with Uranus, don't we? Or rather, we've got a sort of grasp onto its crazy coattails, and yes, the little mind map from my ancient booklet now, and these are just starting points for thinking about Uranian themes. You know, so much of what is Uranian is by definition unconventional or unpredictable or won't be pinned down. Wherever you think I am, that's what I'm not, kind of, you know, energy. And of course, anarchy and rebellion and whatever is radical and indeed liberated, progressive, free, awake, inventive at its best. It's about breakthrough. It's about just pushing into places that and things that haven't, you know, been experienced before. And I guess that does come with its fair share of shock. Yeah. So clearly today we're going to be focusing on Uranus shifting signs, and I'm going to hand over to you, Carole babes, for a little preliminary think.
I mean, I'm just struck about, we obviously, as you say, we all know what Uranus archetypally means, and we all know the myth of Uranus in the Greek myths, and this idea of reform. But of course, in order to reform, you've got to break something to begin with. And Gemini gives us this sense of duality, polarity, polarization, opposites. And so there's a natural schism, I think, there. There's a natural sense with Gemini of falling into opposites or evoking the shadow. And it seems to me that at each of the junctures where Uranus has gone into Gemini, and the periods of time that Uranus has gone through Gemini, there is this sense of, right at the beginning, there being some incredible invention, or a very obvious schism in terms of a revolt, or in terms of a war of independence, separation of a country, for instance. 1948, I didn't put this in there, but right at the end of this period, the previous sojourn of Uranus in Gemini, of course, there was the partition of India. So this idea of there being a desire in the collective to somehow sweep away the old order and bring something new. But of course, in Gemini, what that's evoking is this massive shadow. And so all of these, we can maybe think about the downsides of all of these inventions, or how all of these things have opened up our vision, the dissemination of information as a theme here, and new ways of thinking, radical new ways of thinking. But of course, always with Gemini, we're thinking of that downside of the sense of how do those radical new visions and those new inventions and those changes, how do they resonate with the actuality, the reality of people's lives? So there's all, yeah, I think that's generally a kind of theme here. So I just tracked back a little bit, and stuff happens all the time, and you can pull out of history all sorts of different events to suit a particular thing that you're trying to talk about. But I think what I've tried to do here, even if we're doing this reverse engineering on Uranus and Gemini, what we're doing here, I suppose, is looking at these events through the lens of this particular planetary alignment, or this ingress. And I've just tracked back through these over the last sort of several hundred years. 1439 to 1447, the invention of the movable type printing press. I mean, that was huge, because of course suddenly there can be the dissemination of information, and of course people get to hear about dissent in another part of the country, so they can do joined up thinking and networking. It's what actually comes after this incredible invention that really is the thing that the Uranus impulse is bringing to life. 1523 to 1530, I've tried not to be Britain-centric about this, or US-centric about all of this, but I guess it's hard not to do that in some sense. Henry VIII's divorce crisis, which began in 1527, in 1530 he broke with the papacy. So that idea of that great, well, I won't call it the Great Schism because that's something else, but the idea of the breaking away from the authority and all the possibilities that arose as a result of that. Of course, he couldn't know that one of the greatest monarchs in history British history was about to take the throne. But there it is. So also this, the translation of the Bible by Tyndale, and this team of translators, I think, went back to the original Hebrew and the Greek texts and translated it for the first time into English from the originals. It wasn't the first vernacular Bible, but it was the first one that was taken from the original Hebrew and Greek texts. In other words, it was a direct challenge to the way in which the church had decided to interpret and translate the Bible. And that was absolutely huge. What came on the back of that was people suddenly realizing that they could have an independent relationship with God through this. They didn't have to be mediated necessarily by the church. The Peasants' Revolt across the Holy Roman Empire, 1524 to 1525, which was fueled by this Lutheran Reformation that was going on around the time. Luther's own translation of the Bible into German, which, of course, once the Bible is out there in the vernacular, then literacy rates go up. It's the dissemination of education through just that one text. 1606 to 1614, the establishment of the American colonies. And of course, that brings its own separation in terms of the first Anglo-Powhatan War in Virginia between the English settlers and the Powhatan Confederacy. The King James Bible, published in 1611. 1690 to 1698, first post office system established in the American colonies. William III, William of Orange defeated the Irish and the French armies at the Battle of the Boyne. So this idea of twin systems being split apart is somehow redolent of Uranus going into Gemini. The Press Licensing Act in England expired in 1695. And on the back of that, there's huge freedom of the press and then proliferation of newspapers. The Boston Tea Party, the American War of Independence in the next ingress, which began in 1775. In 1775, Thomas Spence published The Real Rights of Man. And then, of course, the year later, then there's the birth of the USA. The next turn of the wheel, the Opium Wars with China. This idea of othering and separation of culture, I think, is one of the themes that we can start to play with. 1859, Darwin's Origin of Species was published, and the first transatlantic communication cables were laid. So there's direct communication between the USA and Europe for the first time. So this idea of a spark of something that either separates or could potentially unite people, or just disseminates new information, and that new information can be as explosive as Darwin's was. In 1941 to 48, the emergence of the Cold War, mentioned 1948, separation of a partition of India, the first computers being built, the first algorithms being used in code cracking, the Enigma code. So yes, we can reach across into history, think about all these things. I think there was
being told that, yes,
in the chat box. Battle of the Boyne is celebrated on the 12th of July. So that's coming up.
Sorry.
And the Boyne, I mean, the Boyne being this central place in Ireland, which is supposed to be a cohesive point. And yet here it is in this sense of separation. So out of that, we might start to think of some of the Uranus and Gemini themes: revolutions in communication, which then revolutionize the distribution of ideas, and it's the alternative voices and viewpoints that are contained in those ideas that are the thing which cracks open the reality of what has come into being in the previous cycle, and this allows something new to come into being. The democratization of information, the challenge to authority that brings, this idea of who owns the truth and who decides what that is. New forms of education, harnessing technology. We've seen some of that in those events. And the polarization of opposites, this idea of the intractable conflict, which results in some kind of schism. It's almost as if the two sides, what Uranus in Gemini exposes is a natural sense of splitting which exists under the surface. And I think that's what we're seeing maybe in America and the USA, where this big, beautiful bill is actually exposing the incredible gulf that exists between maybe two halves of a nation, depending on your viewpoint on it. Irreconcilable points of view, the idea of opposing ideologies, and it's incredibly difficult to keep those together. They naturally want to split apart, and Uranus is doing its work there. Uranus brings clarity and the lightning rod of some kind of action being effected or brought into possibility. And it's never pleasant when a system splits into two, and when those differences and difficulties and challenges are exposed. And yet we have agents of change across the globe. There's maybe one or two that we could highlight in particular. And it's a mistake perhaps to get caught up completely in trying to disavow the utter carnage that might be created as a result of that change taking place. What's perhaps important is thinking about what divisions are being exposed underneath, and what do we need to pay attention to. The idea of othering, in the collective, the sense of the disparity between one culture and another, and trying to find ways of, I mean, with Uranus in Gemini, that naturally splits into two. The shadow of Uranus emerges, I think, when Uranus goes through Gemini, this idea of the culture hero who rapidly becomes the tyrant. And of course, we see that in the Promethean side of Uranus, but we also see that in the Uranian side, or the Uranus side of Uranus in the Greek myths. He's the tyrant as well as the culture hero.
Yes. So this is the first ingress. Carole and I were chatting before you all joined the meeting, and clearly there are 3 ingress charts, and we'll be looking at a slide with all of them on later on. But I asked our friend, colleague, fellow astrologer Rod Chang, who does a lot of mundane work, does he care which ingress chart, to use? And he was clear about the first one. So even though clearly Uranus is going to go back into Taurus, and then pop in and out, but yeah, we're looking at the very first one, which is going to be on the 7th. And I set it for Greenwich. And yeah, well, there's so much going on in the early degrees at the moment, isn't there? And the first ingress chart has Venus and the moon bound in tightly, as well as Saturn, Neptune, Pluto. Yeah, 26 degrees of Leo on the ascendant for Greenwich. Uranus, as it says here, is trining the last Jupiter-Saturn conjunction of December 2020 at 0 Aquarius, which began the new air cycle, which is going to hold for a couple of 100 years, more or less. And Pluto clearly has also been over that point. So they're all in a minor grand trine currently. How do we feel about that, Carole?
Well, I suppose a lot's been spoken about the idea of the air and the fire together. It feels like a kind of mental ferment taking place. Doesn't feel particularly grounded. It feels like there's a lot of change in the air. And of course, there's, that's borne out by the news every day of the week. There's clearly more to come. You've not seen the last of the changes, and it's very rapid. It feels like something has really, the ground has given way beneath our feet, and it's very unstable. There's rapid movement. I suppose that's what you could say about these trine and sextile arrangements, is that there's very often rapid movement, and lots of ideas being fermented all at once, and not really being given a chance to settle out, so that we don't actually test them in practice before they're kind of, I'm thinking about AI, and the pace of change is so rapid before we've even had a chance to really catch up with the legislation or the grounding of, how does all this work in practice, and what's the outcome going to be?
And that would seem to be ever speeding up, wouldn't it? It's not like it's just hit this rate and now it'll stay like that. I think it is going ever more at a head spinning kind of velocity, really, the rate of change. So
yeah. I just came across this. I thought it was interesting to put in. This is, I mean, it's actually from 2016, this front cover of the New Yorker, which is Trump sawing the elephant of the grand old party, the Republican Party, in half. So he's presented there as the stage magician, sawing the elephant of the Republican Party into two. And, this, yeah, there it all is. There is exactly the project. And I don't want to dwell too much on this. I don't want to dwell on it at all, really. But I don't think it's any coincidence that Trump's own Uranus is in Gemini. So he's at some point in the not too distant future coming up to his Uranus return. Uranus rules his descendant, co-rules it, and is conjunct his sun and North Node in the 10th. So it's the style of leadership. It's his vision of the future, but it's also a shadow, and that comes back to this idea of the trickster and the shadow of, the trickster, and the shadow side of the culture hero, which is the destroyer, anarchy and chaos for its own sake. in order maybe to cover up, it's like a conjuring trick, what's actually going on underneath the surface. Gemini always is a game of two halves. There's the half that you're shown, and then there's the half that you can't see, which is under the surface. It's the shadow side. And sometimes that's unconscious and sometimes it's conscious. And of course, in the chart of the USA itself, coming up to a Uranus return shortly, Uranus on the descendant in Gemini, it just feels as though there's something in the air here which really pivots this Uranus in Gemini ingress toward, it pivots our attention towards what's happening in the United States.
Although, as we were thinking about politicians with Gemini stuff, of course, in the last few days over here, Jeremy Corbyn, who's also a sun in Gemini, has there's been this news event about maybe starting a new independent party with is it Zara Saldana? Yes, I probably pronounced that wrong.
On a lighter note, of course, yesterday at the Venus-Uranus conjunction in Gemini, there was the first concert in Cardiff of Noel and Liam Gallagher.
Oh, the brothers, yes.
You know, the terrible twins. It's the first gig that they've played in 15 years, 16 years, something like that. Yeah, just like that for the symbolism of Venus, Uranus.
Yes, and obviously that's going to roll on, and they're much, reported historical punch-ups and arguments the whole time. I doubt that that's going to change very much, even though they're relatively ancient.
No, but I think it's interesting from a broader perspective, because what their music, I think, did in the 1990s was to highlight the separation, this deep separation that there is in this country between North and South, between what was originally in the 19th century and early part of the 20th century, the industrial heartland. They're both from the southern part of Manchester. So they were like the voice of Manchester. So in the sense of being united together in this band, what they represented was something deeply important for the Britain in the 1990s. On the back of, they were there just after the demise of the Thatcher government, yes, which had pulled the country into two halves, essentially. And so I think it's interesting that they're back now, not because of the music necessarily, but it's a reminder that this separation still exists. The North-South divide, the divide between rich and poor, and various other cultural schisms still exist here just as much as they do in other countries. Yeah, I think it's quite interesting.
The different camps. Was the rivalry at the time, was it said to be between Oasis and Blur? Blur being softy Southerners and more evidently,
that's right,
conventionally middle class. Yeah,
that's right.
So
yes, I love this book. I talk about it anytime I have a chance to do it, and I pulled out this quote: "Lewis Hyde, trickster makes this world." It's just all about trickster mythology. He said, "There's no way to suppress change, not even in heaven. There's only a choice between a way of living which allows constant, if gradual, alterations, and a way of living that combines great control and cataclysmic upheavals. Those who panic and bind the trickster," and that's, in many of the myths, like Loki and the Norse myths, the gods try to bind Loki so that he doesn't bring about the end of the world. But of course, it doesn't work. The end of the world happens anyway. Those who panic and bind the trickster choose the latter path. It would be better to learn to play with him, better especially to develop skills, cultural, spiritual, artistic, that allows some commerce with accident, and some acceptance of the changes that contingency will always engender. I'm not a great believer that, we're all going to experience Uranus in Gemini on a very personal level, because it's a collective movement. And yet, I think, we are all part of the collective voice in some way. And on some level, and if you've got a Uranus transit happening at this particular moment, of course, Liam Gallagher, whose chart is available on Astro Databank, should you wish to go and seek it out. has 0 degrees of Gemini on his descendant. So there it is. Anybody who's got a significant transit of Uranus at the moment is likely to be drawn into this energy field. And the idea of learning to play with the trickster, I think, is interesting here. To be open, to not close the door on any possibilities, and to get used to the idea of the sense of inconsistency or rapid change, not to try and lock things down, to get used to the uncertainty and live in the fertility of that.
I love that phrase, commerce with accident, allow some commerce with accident. Of course, commerce is a very Gemini word, isn't it? And accident is a very Uranus word too. Beautiful. Yeah, and obviously your own chart. Whatever you've got at 0 of any of the mutable signs will be triggered by Uranus moving into Gemini. And whatever you've got at 15 of the cardinal as well is going to be picking up the semi-squares and sesquiquadrates. And since it's only possible to really track the sun, and or for me to know where the sun is going to be, because I don't know where the rest of your stuff is, clearly if you're born around the 20th or 21st of May, you've got your sun at around 0 of Gemini. But also if you're born 7th of July or thereabouts, 7th of October thereabouts, 4th of April, 6th of Jan, you're going to be picking up the semi-squares and the sesquiquadrates to your sun. The same is true around the 22nd, 23rd of August, that's 0 of Virgo. 22nd of November or thereabouts is 0 of Sag, and 19th of February or thereabouts is 0 of Pisces. So again, the sesquiquadrates and the semi-squares are going to be coming from 15 or coming to 15 of cardinals now. So High Wire Act, it's the only planet named after a Greek rather than a Roman god, and the only one that goes around in that way, like it's been described as like a tombola. It's kind of on its side rather than spinning the way that the other planets do. And in Eberton's book, Combination of Stellar Influences, which isn't a very cozy book, but it is called Cozy, as a sort of nickname, or obviously it's an acronym. He lists the psychological correspondences as peculiarity, independence, love of freedom, intuition allied with objective judgment, obstinate nature, lack of adaptability, which is interesting, isn't it? Because it's a paradoxical thing. Uranus is change and resistance to change. Rebellion, strong emotional tensions, a passion for innovation, and changeability of character. This is a lovely quote from The Knot of Time, which was, I think, one of my very first astrology books and remains one of my all-time favorites. Conventional society does not easily tolerate eccentricity in the genius or in the misfit. Disapproval of the outsider comes from unconscious censorship of the Uranian streak in all of us, our eccentricity. An indicator of the health of any society is in the room it allows for difference, for human contradictions. The eccentric is vitally important for her otherness, gives a fuller identity to her community. One of the nicest things about The Knot of Time is that all of the pronouns are changed from the classic he to she or her. Perhaps if it were reprinted today, all of the pronouns would be changed to they. Christine Valentine images of the psyche Uranus is dangerous when in the hands of those who have not come to terms with Saturnian reality. For the Uranian vision is both revolutionary and electrifying in that it cuts us off from the feeling life of our own bodies, our own ordinary human needs and sensitivities. This is what produces the mentality that states the end justifies the means, and allows justification for such atrocities that occurred in the French Revolution, Russian Revolution, Auschwitz, and in terrorist activities today, all in the name of noble ideals. Written in 1991 or published in 1991, and obviously there's no shortage of current day things related by that quote. Gemini. we know, again, what Gemini can represent, or archetypally what it's about. And I think perhaps curiosity is one thing that can assist or save us, or, make it easier, because of course Uranus can be very black and white, can be very rigid, can be very my way or the highway, or Gemini is all about alternatives, and not just wanting to be informed, but being interested, asking questions, trying to learn, trying to articulate, trying to think about things. And yeah, there is this obvious, as Carole was saying, question of duality and the both and, or the either or the neither nor, that kind of splitting or difference. And yet in Gemini, there's also this sense not simply of the binary, but of the sort of androgynous, or what am I trying to say? Kind of the neutrality that Gemini has, where it can be both one thing and the opposite of that thing. So I think it represents something of not just this radical split and this othering and this us and them, and this kind of battle lines drawn across inalienable, you're on this side of the line, which is wrong, and I'm on this side of the line, which is right. All of that stuff that's happening these days. But I think it's also classically quite non-binary, in as much as it refuses, Uranus and Gemini refuses to be just one thing, because it is also not that thing. Yeah, I'm not making much sense to my own ears here. Never mind, you're used to it. Yes, I was thinking, all these ways of the information that is just piling on the whole time. Yeah. Oh, for the days of the quill pen and the parchment, who can keep up with all the different platforms where stuff is happening and people have things to say, and the comment below the line, all of it. Yeah, this is a picture of a mug on a supermarket shelf. The future is, and I don't know what the word beneath the sticker is, but the shop put on it, reduced for quick sale, $2, which Carole and I are agreeing is perhaps overpriced, Carole. Anyway, wit, humor, laughing at, making jokes, classic Gemini territory. And the whole idea of being connected, and being in a network and being able to communicate, clearly there's more availability in that area in a lot of the world than there's ever been. But it's also kind of out of control, and we are caught in that web. Yes, we don't necessarily know more or understand more, despite all the different platforms and channels. Maybe we did think sat nav would be like this, kind of magical map film hybrid on the front of our car. But what it actually is, or can be, is a kind of global tracker, keeping tabs on you. What's your location data, which can be collected, it can be stored, it can be accessed, used. Oh, yeah, the old-fashioned ways of thinking about modern technology. It's fascinating to look back and to see what we imagined the future would be like. What in the future, imagine in the 50s or 60s, we're all going to be eating by swallowing a pill, weren't we? That hasn't happened yet. And we're all going to be flying around in our spacesuits or whatever. It hasn't happened yet either. But yeah, Uranus has a way of just not really being predictable. This is one early piece of genuine wearable tech. I think this goes back to the 80s, but it's very reasonable to imagine that passage of Uranus through Gemini this time round is going to lead to a proliferation or even an explosion in more hardware, more tech, stuff linked to hands, which are Gemini, fingers, which are Gemini, arms and shoulders. Gemini is the sign of the zodiac where the body splits into two. And so it's lungs as well. And obviously our lungs are vital to taking in oxygen, which is vital to having our brain work, and it's all joined up. And it wouldn't be in any way surprising to have new systems or new things going on. And it doesn't have to be, you know, we've already seen creative fiction around implanting things, you know, turning our hands into phones and so on, and maybe it'll come to that. But I saw something not long ago about a wonderful glove device which enabled people with terrible tremor, for example, people suffering from Parkinson's, to still their hand. And it was in its prototype, and this young artist who had a terrible tremor and could no longer create her art, and she put the glove on it, and she was able to use to draw and to paint and to illustrate in the way that she used to. Yeah, she was just sort of weeping with joy. And yeah, maybe that kind of thing, you know, is going to be part of what is great about what comes up. There are so many different overwhelming possibilities, really, once you put technology, invention, innovation, and known for, you know, new ideas into what we're thinking about, what we're trying to create, what we're using to process and learn. So change, disruption, rebellion, splits, technology, innovation, and breakthrough linked to, again, the classic, or some of the classic Gemini areas: education and school, learning in general, books, phones, comms, connections, data, language, information, commerce, that word again, our negotiations, our deals, transport too, is clearly a Gemini thing, print and media, and then, as we said, heart, hands, arms, shoulders, lungs, nervous system, anything by, to, and non-binary to, and then neighbors, siblings, which we heard with Oasis, brotherhoods, sisterhoods, youth in general is kind of Gemini area. What do you think, Carole?
I think it's interesting how this, you know, we obviously don't know exactly how this is going to play out in terms of whether the things that are created are going to be good or bad, or what strikes me about Uranus, going back to mythology, is the idea that he produced endless offspring, none of whom pleased him because they were all imperfect as he saw it. So they were pushed back into the earth, into the womb of Gaia. So they were not allowed to be born. And that goes back to what you were saying before about the idea of there needs to be a Saturn, there needs to be Saturn in there. There needs to be a sense of what's the purpose of these inventions. So I imagine what we'll see is a lot of invention taking place, and actually quite a bit of it falls by the wayside, or it turns out to be a kind of Frankenstein's monster, or a piece of technology that actually doesn't serve the purpose. And I was thinking also in relation to education and schools, of course, it's we see disruption and rebellion in attempts at the moment to remove certain books from libraries and from primary school or junior school education, and so on. So the best of it, I think, the best of this ingress, of this passage through this sign, is that we attempt to go back to some sense of a democratic dissemination of information, a sense of openness, or a sense of being able to listen to the other side and suspend our judgment, so that the possibilities that Gemini is endlessly fertile in creating, and Uranus also, can somehow, we can choose from that, and we can work out what actually works, and try to give that some kind of basis and foundation and grounding. Yes, I think that we go back to this idea of the rapidity with which change in all of these areas could happen, and probably is already happening.
Yeah, it's almost ungraspable, isn't it? Loads of things on the screen here I don't really understand, or I think some of them might be kind of talked about or thought about, some of them might be underway, but as Carole said, this proliferation or potential proliferation of new technologies, new languages, new ideas, new ways of using things. Not everything's going to come through, is it? But I do think robotic hands and robotic arms are absolutely going to become more the norm. 4-dimensional printing, what is that? I don't know. Aerogel, amorphous metal, retinal displays, yes, bionic contact lenses, artificial photosynthesis, artificial brains. That's again something that would seem to go with the symbolism quite literally, wouldn't it? Ambient intelligence, yes, fusion rockets, powered exoskeletons. It's all feeling a bit Terminator 2. Oh, yes. Did this happen? No. Did this happen? No, but in yellow. You know, the whole idea of what is true and what is the truth. And yes, lovely Buzz Lightyear. There seems to be no sign of intelligent life anymore. I think it's possible to look at parts of the world now and feel like that, you know, as a sort of gut response. As it says in the bottom right, experts say ChatGPT has already polluted the internet so badly that it's eroding AI development. Carole, did you read about that case where someone submitted a series of books of the year, a freelance journalist, to their particular publication, one of the sort of major news sheets in America, and it became clear that they had used AI to create this, and AI had fictionalized the books. So the books, which was some of the books of the year and reviewed in these thumbnail pieces, didn't even exist. So this journalist had done, you know, not fact checked in any way. And it's like, yeah, classic. I think there's going to be a lot more of that going on as well. And
But was it a more interesting list than it might have been if it had been constructed by hand?
books made up, whatever. Yeah. And how all of that kind of headspace, how air and Uranus both, of course, are very antithetical towards the more soulful, softer, sensitive, you know, watery tendencies. And yeah, we, as you say, the counterbalance or the rounding out that a moon in Scorpio or any of the water signs can bring is, you know, super useful and necessary now. Because the brutality of a machine or the kind of white hot clarity of a new idea or an invention or experiment or something radical, you know, cannot be very humane and soft. And as Carole was saying earlier, it's not really about ordinary people and how we live our lives and, you know, what matters and impacts on us. Yeah, absolutely.
There's such a lot of water in the discovery chart. It's almost like a warning.
Right.
Like a celestial sign.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. And this is just side by side pointing out the same things. So here are all three ingresses, and perhaps we'll what do you think? Should we go in now or should we take a break and then come back to these charts, Carole?
Well, this is the final slide, isn't it?
Ah,
I think.
Is it?
I think so. I think we've done a Uranus and Gemini and
We've
whizzed
done
through
quite well.
everything at breakneck speed, which is great. I mean, it's fun because I think it would be nice to actually do some water stuff, which is to bring it into the personal, and bring it into a conversation, bring everybody into that. I mean, I have to say I don't have a great deal to say about these three ingress charts. And really, the only thing I wanted to flag up here is the idea that, yes, quite right. So when Rod is saying use the first ingress chart, on the other hand, I think maybe it's a little bit like when you have a planetary return, like a Mars return or a Venus return, where that planet goes retrograde. So you end up with three of them. And for me, not that I'm a mundane astrologer of any stripe, particularly, it's not my main thing. But the way I would see this is that there's some kind of process playing itself out. And these, of course, are all set for London, but there's some kind of process playing itself out during the course of the ingress. So there's the going in, there's the retrograde coming out back into Taurus, and then there's the third chart, which is the final ingress. And I think even if you end up going back to the first chart as your key ingress chart that tells you, that it gives you the clearest view, perhaps, of what is upcoming, there is something interesting to engage with in the process of moving between these three charts over the course of the next 9 months, whatever it's going to be. I think it's interesting that we start with a Venus-Uranus conjunction and we end with a Venus-Uranus conjunction. And in the middle, they move into a quincunx with each other. There's something about continuing that Venusian theme. I'm not sure exactly what that means, but I think it will be interesting to see at these different juncture points, is this a process taking place that isn't just about one set of information, but three sets of information, or some kind of step-by-step process. I mean, that's certainly how I read planetary returns, where there is a retrograde, so you get three different charts.
Yes. It calls to mind that part of the Aphrodite myth, doesn't it, as well? Aphrodite Urania, who was born out of the castration of Uranus, and the genitalia thrown into the sea, and there she came, born of the foam. And new art, or new art forms, or new ways of getting along with each other, is a kind of Venus-Uranus hopeful message, isn't it? Or hopeful archetype. We wish.
Yes. The possibility of integration.
Should we have our little break?
Yes, let's do that.
Afterwards, we can kind of throw things open a bit, can't we?
Yes.
I've got a couple of Uranus and Gemini style poems. Most unlike me not to have a poem up the sleeve. So perhaps we'll start with that, and then we'll just go into, general discussion and, see what comes out. Okay. So what do we reckon? 10 minutes? Come back at 10 past?
Yes.
How's that? Okay.
Okay, see you all shortly.
So let's have a look at the old chat box. AI detector for essays. Yes. I'm wondering whether the AI detection can keep up with the AI itself, though, and what the devil that does. Anyway, couple of quick
whole
points.
issue of trust is interesting, isn't it? To trust the information.
I know. I mean, talk about fake news and all of that. Yeah. And given that Gemini is so good at mimicry, the ability to mimic things, and the kind of some surprises or shocks coming that way. Yeah. So what do they call it? Deep fakes. Anyway, let's
literally truth social, isn't it? Uranus and Gemini.
Don't even. I can't. I've lost the ability to can on any of that. Yes. Yeah, Uranus being the higher octave of Mercury, how might this be helpful as we move into Gemini? Yes, we'll talk about that. I'm going to take momentary refuge in poetry and then let the debate take us where it will. So this is something called Freedom by Langston Hughes. Freedom will not come today, this year, nor ever through compromise and fear. I have as much right as the other fellow has to stand on my 2 feet and own the land. I tire so of hearing people say, let things take their course. Tomorrow is another day. I do not need my freedom when I'm dead. I cannot live on tomorrow's bread. Freedom is a strong seed planted in a great need. I live here too. I want my freedom just as you. Thank you, Langston Hughes. Sun in Aquarius. He had an exact Uranus opposite Pluto. His generation had Pluto in Gemini. And this is The Piece of Wild Things by Wendell Berry. When despair for the world grows in me, and I wake in the night at the least sound, in fear of what my life and my children's lives may be, I go and lie down where the wood drake rests in his beauty on the water and the great heron feeds. I come into the peace of wild things who do not tax their lives with forethought of grief. I come into the presence of still water and I feel above me the day-blind stars waiting with their light. For a time, I rest in the grace of the world and am free.
I have a poem too, but maybe we could leave it till the end.
Okay, great. So, I could, yeah, let's have a think about things now together.
Yeah, I mean, like I said before, how, to what extent do we actually feel the sign that a transiting planet is in? And that's it's kind of an open question, really. I'm not sure I particularly know the answer to that. I don't know a specific answer to it. I guess being generational, more generational and collective than personal, we don't necessarily always feel it very powerfully in terms of the transits. But I think, we're still all part of the zeitgeist. And particularly if it picks up something, if you've got planets in Gemini that it's going over, or planets that, even if Uranus is not actually, you haven't got something at 0 degrees. If you've got planets in Gemini, it's you're in that field. You're in that energetic field. So
yes,
yeah.
I know some astrologers believe that when there's a sort of major shift, any planet at any point of the sign that we possess, is capable of being a kind of lightning rod in this case, or responding. And yeah, you've got Gemini on the ascendant and a Gemini sun, Carole. Yes,
I do. It's worse than that. It's Mercury and Venus too.
yes. Right. So,
Oh boy, oh boy.
mm.
Yeah.
And of course, anybody who has important angles or personal planets at around the 0 of the mutables, any of the mutable signs, or indeed around 15, any of the cardinal signs, it's definitely plugging in. Yeah. Yeah. And the house, to a lesser extent, because Uranus is going to spend 7 years in a house. But maybe if you've got very early house cusp degrees, then yeah, Uranus shifting houses, maybe you'll be feeling that. Yeah. Rashunda, yes.
I think it's a really pertinent thing to say, and that idea of the cracking open is exactly the function of Uranus. And then you have to think about what is it that's being cracked open, because actually it's a collective experience and it belongs to all of us. The idea of the freedom of speech belongs to all of us. All of these things belong to all of us. And Gemini does that sleight of hand very, very easily, of deflecting from the depths. But contained in the sign is the idea of the movement between those two spaces. There's the celestial twin, and there's the terrestrial or the darker twin. And when you think about twin mythology, there's very often, like the Set Osiris mythology, or Ahura Mazda and Ahriman, or God and Satan. You know, the sense of the duality is contained within the whole, and that's what Gemini evokes. So absolutely right, we're never going to have an answer to this. So come back to this idea of Uranus and Gemini is opening a question. It's saying, how far do you want to look into this? And what is, you talked about the idea of the root. What is the root of this? It's to have the courage to actually look beyond the surface. That's always the deal with Gemini, is to have the courage to explore beyond the surface. To do the opposite thing, which is the Sagittarian, the Sagittarian opposite, is to actually stare into the dark heart of something, to go into the adventure of it or into the depth of it. And to bring that out into the light. It's always that pivoting between two places. So to me, part of the answer to this is actually understanding our own personal darkness. There's that thing that Jung said, something along the lines of, I mean, broadly speaking, something along the lines of, if there's something wrong with the collective, there's something wrong with the individual. And if there's something wrong with the individual, there's something wrong with me. In other words, where, that's bringing it down to the mercurial level, to the personal level. That higher octave thing is actually bringing it into our own personal experience. So where do we experience these schisms and splits, and the rejection of true feeling, true meaning, true motivation? The dark heart, we've all got one, collectively and individually. So I think it's a really interesting way of looking at it. Thank you for that.
Yeah. I know the looking back, I think so often with any transit, things become a lot more make a lot more sense, or become a lot clearer, or more orderly. Yeah, but the flipping the script, or turning things upside down, or surprising ourselves at best, maybe, perhaps shocking other people. But this kind of like world turned upside down feel, I guess, is Uranus into a new sign, or can be. And just not to harp on, but I'm harping on about, the situation across the pond, as we say over here, and how this is a country built on colonialization and genocide of the original natural first people. And yet now it seems to be about trying to eject anybody that it labels as an immigrant. It's so... it's very hard to process. I think, that kind of thing where you can't make it make sense.
Or rereading Carl Karenni's book on Hermes, and reminded me that the word psychopompos, so the pompos part of it, is the idea of leading on. That's how he interprets it. So in other words, it comes back to this trickster, and that comes back to Rashunda, your point about being led into the underworld, about actually being led deliberately by the trickster into this darker space, because that's where the real information is. That's where the real truth of the matter is, to be able to look at that, to allow yourself to be taken into that space. So I think that's quite interesting.
3.5, 4 minutes left. So yeah, Carole, how shall we end things?
Can I read out my poem? Not my poem, a poem, which is Fernando Pessoa, and it's from a collection of poems called Forever Someone Else. He was a Gemini. Sun at 22:59 of Gemini. Venus also conjunct the Sun in Gemini. And a Neptune-Pluto conjunction. He was born at the Neptune-Pluto conjunction. So Neptune at 0°39 of Gemini. So bang on there. Of course, as a Gemini, a self-respecting Gemini, he wrote under about, this is something like, I don't know, there's 160 names that he wrote under.
Wow.
He bifurcated into all of these different voices, each of them to say something slightly different or say it in a slightly different way. Anyway, this is from, can't remember which voice this is from, but anyway, he said, this is the poem. Ah, open my eyes to another reality. I want to feel, like Blake, the angels all around me, and to have visions for lunch. I want to meet fairies in the street. I want to forget I'm of this world made with claws, this civilization made with nails. I want to live like a flag in the breeze, a symbol of whatever on top of wherever. Then you can lock me up where you like. My true heart will continue to keep watch from atop the flagpole of visions. A cloth emblazoned with sphinxes, flapping in the four winds of mystery. The north, what everyone wants. The south, what everyone desires. The east, where everything comes from. The west, where everything ends. The four winds of civilization's mystical air. The four ways of not knowing and of understanding the world.
Love it. Fantastic, fantastic, and very inspiring kind of embracing of the ideas, I think. Yeah, classic. Thank you.
Right.
So, yeah.
Thank you so much, everybody, for giving up your Saturday afternoon, morning, evening to be with us. It's wonderful to see everybody, and yeah, have a great rest of the summer, and we will see you hopefully in the autumn.
Stay in touch, however gently, and if there are particular areas that you'd like us to think about pursuing in future terms, it's always nice to know. So yeah, shoot us an email, get into your Uranus and Gemini, and light up some new ideas about what you want to hear about or talk about. And yeah, thank you. Have a brilliant Saturday evening and rest of summer for anyone we're not seeing again, and catch you on the flip side.
Thank you.
Take care, everybody. Bye now.
Bye, lovely ones.